Keanu Reeves finally reveals how black magic nearly destroyed his life. Before starting the video, tell us where from you are watching this video. Please like and subscribe the channel. Hit bell icon button for the notification of our next video. At the peak of his fame, while the world saw Keanu Reeves as untouchable, the face of the Matrix, the internet's gentleman hero, the man who moved with grace through chaos, he was silently unraveling. Behind the lights, the interviews, and the calm presence, something dark had entered his life. Something he couldn't explain. He had always carried a certain quiet sorrow, a stillness that people admired. But this was different. It was as if something had started following him. Watching him. Waiting. At first, he chalked it up to exhaustion. The long hours on set, the pressure to always perform, and the unbearable weight of personal grief. After all, he had known more than his share of tragedy. The loss of his daughter. The death of his beloved Jennifer Syme. And yet, this was something else entirely. It started with the dreams. Vivid, violent, recurring nightmares where he was drowning in black water, chained by invisible hands. Then came the constant chills, even in warm rooms. Objects in his home began shifting places. A whisper here, a shadow there, too quick to catch but impossible to ignore. Doctors found nothing wrong. Blood tests, brain scans, sleep studies, all normal. A therapist suggested unresolved trauma, but Keanu wasn't new to pain. He knew the difference between grief and fear. This was fear. Real, primal, gut-twisting fear that crawled under his skin and stayed there. He tried ignoring it, diving into work, traveling more, cutting back on sleep, anything to outrun the feeling. But it followed him. Into hotel rooms. Onto film sets. Even into his meditation. It was everywhere, and it was growing stronger. Then something strange happened. One morning, Keanu opened the door to his modest home in the Hollywood Hills and found an envelope on the ground. There was no stamp. No name. Just his own written in black ink, and under it, a symbol he didn't recognize, a perfect spiral inside a circle, crossed by a single jagged line. Inside the envelope was a small black feather and a piece of parchment. The paper was old, textured, and covered in writing that looked ancient, symbols that twisted like vines, forming words in a language he couldn't place. But the center of the message was clear. There was a name. His name. Written out in full, Keanu Charles Reeves. He stared at it for several minutes, his fingers trembling just slightly. Logic tried to take over. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some overzealous fan. Maybe it was part of a film prop gone astray. But something in his gut told him otherwise. That night, the dreams returned darker than ever. This time, the figure in the shadows spoke. You were chosen, it whispered. You turned away from her gift. Now you walk with what she summoned. Shaken, Keanu reached out to a friend he hadn't spoken to in years, an old acting coach turned spiritual advisor. The man, known for dabbling in mysticism and ancient texts, took one look at the envelope and froze. He didn't say anything for nearly a minute. Then he whispered, This isn't a prank, Keanu. This is a binding. Someone sent this to tether you. Still skeptical, Keanu pressed him for more. The coach explained that in certain dark spiritual circles, a binding curse could be placed on someone not to destroy them outright, but to trap their energy, dull their spirit, block their blessings. The black feather was a symbol of silence, spiritual suppression. The symbols were of origin an obscure form of Haitian voodoo fused with something much older, possibly pre-colonial African rites. Who would do this to me? Keanu asked. The man responded quietly, not who, but why. That night, Keanu couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his kitchen with every light on. His hands gripped a rosary, even though he wasn't religious. It was just something to hold onto, something physical in the face of a reality that seemed to be slipping further into darkness. The next morning, he made a decision. He needed to dig into his past. Someone had sent that curse. And deep down, he had a haunting suspicion who it might be. Keanu Reeves didn't waste time. He booked a private flight under a pseudonym, left Los Angeles, and headed for a quiet, anonymous place in upstate New York. There was someone he needed to see, someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Her name was Margot Vale. She had once been a friend, a strange and intense woman he met during the filming of a lesser-known indie movie in the late 90s. Margot had always been different. While the rest of the crew bonded over late-night drinks and film theory, she would wander alone in the woods near the cabins they were staying in, collecting feathers, bones, and pieces of broken mirrors. She once told Keanu, "There are forces older than God. If you ever cross one of them, make sure you leave a gift behind." He hadn't thought about her in years. Their relationship was brief, more mental than romantic. She was drawn to his sadness. And he, at the time, was searching for meaning in anything. But it ended abruptly when she started whispering things in other languages during phone calls and leaving cryptic notes in his trailer. One night, she showed up at his apartment unannounced, handed him a small wooden box, and said, "Keep this near your bed. It will protect your soul while you dream." He never opened the box. A few days later, he cut off contact. Now, over a decade later, he stood on the porch of her cottage deep in the Catskills, unsure whether she was even still alive. The air smelled like rain and old wood. He knocked once. No answer. Then, just as he turned to leave, the door creaked open. She was standing there, barefoot, wrapped in a shawl, her long gray-streaked hair falling down her shoulders like wet vines. She looked at him with no surprise, only tired recognition. "You came," she said. "I wondered when the shadows would push you back here." They sat in silence for several minutes inside her candlelit home. Margot offered him tea that tasted like earth and cinnamon. Keanu didn't ask questions at first. He simply stared at her. The room smelled like dried herbs and smoke. There were shelves filled with books in dead languages, symbols drawn on the windows in white chalk, and several jars filled with strange items, beetles, rusted nails, dried petals. Finally, he spoke. "Did you do it?" he asked quietly. She didn't look away. "No," she said. "But I know who did." The words hung heavy in the air. She explained that after Keanu pushed her away, someone else stepped into her life, someone jealous, someone powerful. A woman named Celeste, who had watched Keanu from a distance and believed she was meant to unlock his spiritual power. Celeste, Margot said, was part of a fringe occult circle that believed in using dark spiritual practices not just to harm, but to redirect fate. She saw Keanu as a gateway, a soul with a rare vibration, someone born of grief and light. And when he rejected her subtle advances during a chance meeting years ago at a private Hollywood event, she took it as a betrayal. "She didn't want to kill you," Margot said. "That's not how it works. She wanted to dim you. Make you spiritually numb. Slowly. Quietly. It's an old West African binding adapted into her own twisted ritual." The black feather was just the start. Keanu sat still, his jaw tight. He could feel the weight of her words anchoring something in his chest. All the strange symptoms, the dreams, the shadows, the sense of being followed, they weren't imagined. They were summoned. Margot reached behind a curtain and pulled out an old leather-bound book. She flipped to a page showing a symbol nearly identical to the one on the envelope. "You have to understand," she said, "this isn't about revenge. It's about control. Some people don't want to hurt you. They want to own you, even your silence." Keanu left the cabin with more questions than answers, but with one undeniable truth: the curse was real, and someone had done it with full intent. That night, in a cheap motel outside Albany, he scrolled through his phone until he found the name he hadn't dared call in years, a spiritual medium in New Orleans named Elijah Knox. He had met Elijah once, during a charity event, and remembered how the man spoke in riddles and said things no one else could have known. With trembling hands, he pressed dial. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, low and calm, as if it had been expecting him. "Keanu," the man said. Not a question, a statement. Elijah Knox hadn't aged much. He sounded just as he had all those years ago, deep-voiced, smooth, with a strange echo that made it feel like he was never quite alone, even when speaking on the phone. "It's not often that a man like you calls someone like me," he said. "But I knew it would happen. Eventually." Keanu sat on the edge of the motel bed, staring at the faded wallpaper, the receiver pressed tightly against his ear. He didn't know how to begin. He didn't need to. Elijah continued. "You've been marked. Not by death. Not by pain. But by possession. Not of your body, of your path." Those words sent a chill down Keanu's spine. He felt his breath catch in his throat, but he forced it down. "Can it be undone?" he asked. Elijah chuckled softly, like a man who'd heard that question 1,000 times. "Anything made can be unmade," he said, "but only if you're willing to pay the price. This curse wasn't meant to kill you. It was designed to distort the air around you. To twist your energy, make your kindness look like weakness, your silence feel like emptiness. It's not just haunting you, it's shifting the way the world sees you." Keanu pressed for details. He needed to know how it worked, why it had taken hold of him so subtly, so completely. Elijah explained that curses like this one weren't made with dolls or needles or loud rituals. They were crafted in silence, in shadows, using personal energy, hair, breath, even memory. Someone had meditated on Keanu's image, fed it into a spiral of intent, and locked it away in an object, buried or hidden, still pulsing with its purpose. "You need to find it," Elijah said. "The anchor. The thing holding it in place. Until you do, the binding will grow roots." That night, Keanu drove for hours without knowing where he was going. His thoughts swirled like storm clouds. He thought about every gift he'd ever been given by a stranger, every fan encounter that had felt too intense, every room he'd walked into and instantly wanted to leave. Something had followed him through the years, latching on in plain sight. By dawn, he was in Philadelphia, staying in a hotel under another fake name. He barely slept. Instead, he dug through old journals, film memorabilia, photographs. He called his assistant and asked for every list of items in storage, every gift archived, every old prop still in his possession. Something had to be there. The anchor. The source. 2 days later, he got a call. A storage unit in Burbank, one he'd forgotten he even rented, had a sealed wooden box in a metal case, one that had never been opened. It had been moved there nearly 13 years ago. The assistant read the inventory tag aloud. Wooden box. Carved top. Inscribed with "For your protection. No return address." Keanu froze. He knew exactly what it was. The box Margot had given him. The one he was told never to open. The one he'd ignored for over a decade. He flew back to Los Angeles immediately, ignoring calls, turning off his phone, moving like a man possessed. When he arrived at the storage unit, he asked to be left alone. The air inside was stale and hot. Dust floated in the sunbeams that pierced through the ceiling vents. And there it was on the top shelf, covered in a black velvet cloth, the box that had haunted the edge of his memory for all these years. He pulled it down gently. His hands trembled. He sat on the concrete floor, laid the box in his lap, and stared at it. There was a choice now. Open it, or let it remain a mystery. But deep inside, he already knew what had to be done. With a slow breath, he opened the lid. Inside was a small mirror, cracked down the middle, and a tiny pouch made of red silk. He picked up the mirror. The moment he touched it, a jolt ran through his arm, not pain exactly, but something colder, deeper. His ears rang. The room seemed to dim. Then he opened the pouch. It held strands of hair, braided together with black thread. His hair. From years ago. A piece of parchment sat at the bottom, stained and curling. On it were symbols he now recognized, the same as the envelope, the same as the curse. Only now, there was something different. A word scribbled at the bottom in ink darker than blood. Forgiven. Keanu dropped the pouch and fell back, gasping for air. The moment the word was read aloud in his mind, something broke. The pressure that had followed him for years, the feeling of being watched, bound, shadowed, lifted. He could feel it leave, like smoke curling out of a bottle. He sat there, sweating, shivering, and laughing all at once. For the first time in years, the silence in the room was just silence, not a presence. Not a whisper. Just peace. But peace comes at a cost. Because as the curse broke, something else awakened. Something that had been watching from the other side. Something not ready to let go. Keanu left the storage unit feeling lighter, almost reborn. The sun felt warmer. His footsteps felt real again. The suffocating weight that had sat on his shoulders for years seemed to have vanished. For the first time in over a decade, he looked in the mirror and recognized the man staring back. But peace, real peace, doesn't just arrive quietly, not after something like that. Not when you've been tethered to a force that feeds on distortion. Something had shifted, yes. But the game wasn't over. Breaking the curse didn't close the door. It opened another. That night, back at his home in the Hollywood Hills, the silence felt unfamiliar. Not threatening, just different. He walked through each room slowly, checking every window, every corner. He didn't know what he was looking for exactly, but his body did. His instincts were sharp now, humming with a kind of spiritual static. He lit candles without thinking. Not for light. For something older. Protective. As the flames danced in the shadows, he stood in the middle of the living room, eyes closed, heart steady. That's when he heard it, not a sound, but a feeling, like a vibration moving through the walls. Not menacing, not violent. Just, watching. At 3:13 a.m., he jolted awake from a dream so vivid it left a mark. In the dream, he stood in a forest where the trees bent inward, forming a circle. In the center, a woman with no face whispered his name in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. "You were not supposed to break it," she said. "You were chosen." Her voice was not angry, but disappointed, like a mother scolding a child who stepped off a path. Keanu woke up sweating, the sheets tangled around his legs. He turned on every light in the house, poured himself a glass of water, and stared out the window for what felt like hours. The city looked calm, but he could feel it in his chest, something was coming. The next day, he called Elijah again. This time, his voice was tight, clipped, urgent. "I broke it," he said. "But now something else is here. Something different." Elijah didn't respond right away. Then finally, in a calm, unnervingly casual tone, he said, "You didn't just end the binding. You took the energy out of balance. These things don't exist in isolation. When you cut one tether, another tries to latch on. You burn the bridge, Keanu. Now they know you're aware. That makes you a beacon." That word hit hard, beacon. He hadn't just freed himself. He'd lit a flare in a dark spiritual sky, and now, things he couldn't name were circling. Elijah told him there was a way to protect himself. Not to stop the energy completely, but to shield it. A ritual. Ancient, clean, and dangerous if done without precision. He needed 3 things: something of his bloodline, something gifted to him in love, and something he feared. Only then could the seal be made. Keanu didn't hesitate. He gathered what he needed, a ring that once belonged to his father, tucked away in a box of old letters, a crumpled note from a fan, a little girl with cancer who had written to him saying he gave her hope when she had none, and finally, a broken wristwatch he hadn't touched in years, the same one he wore the night of the motorcycle accident that nearly killed him. The same accident that left him questioning if he'd ever wake up whole again. They met at an abandoned church outside New Orleans. Elijah stood waiting in the center, candles arranged in precise, circular patterns on the cracked tile floor. The air smelled like smoke and salt. Keanu handed over the items without a word. Elijah took them, whispered in a language that made Keanu's skin crawl, and began the ritual. Time seemed to stretch and fold. The wind outside howled without touching a single candle inside. Keanu felt his body go cold, then hot, then weightless. He could hear voices not speaking, but remembering. Laughs he'd forgotten. Cries he had buried. Regret pulsing like a heartbeat. The veil between the worlds was thin now. Thinner than ever. Then something went wrong. The candles flickered violently. One by one, they began to go out. Elijah's voice faltered. He looked up at Keanu, eyes wide not with fear, but confusion. "They're not leaving," he said. "They're multiplying." A wind slammed through the doors. Shadows poured into the church like liquid smoke. And in the middle of it all stood the woman from the dream, no face, but a presence so heavy it bent the light around her. "You were chosen," she said again, louder this time. "You were not meant to be free. You were meant to lead." The shadows surged forward, swallowing the light, the floor, the air. Keanu reached for Elijah, but the man was already fading, like dust in wind. The last thing Keanu saw before the darkness took him was his own reflection in a shattered mirror at the altar, eyes glowing faintly with something that wasn't entirely his. Then everything went black. When Keanu opened his eyes, he was lying on the cold stone floor of the old church, alone. The candles were gone. The altar was covered in ash. And the sky beyond the shattered windows was a dull gray, like the world had been drained of color. He sat up slowly, feeling his bones ache in ways that didn't make sense, not from injury, but from something deeper. He didn't know how long he'd been unconscious, but the silence around him was deafening. Elijah was gone. So was the mirror. The woman, the shadows, the storm, all vanished. But he could still feel them. Lingering. Hovering at the edge of the present like a cold breath on the back of his neck. Whatever had happened during that ritual hadn't sealed anything. It had opened something wider, deeper. And now, it was inside him. In the days that followed, Keanu tried to return to normal life. He filmed a few scenes on set. Smiled at the cameras. Signed autographs. But inside, he was different. Something had shifted. He could sense people's energy without even trying. Some would walk by him, and he'd feel warmth, the rush of kindness or joy. But others, especially in crowded places, gave off a hum of static, fear, or even worse, something cold and unnatural. He began avoiding crowds. Staying home more. But it didn't help. The visions started again. Not dreams, this time, but flashes in mirrors, puddles, glass. Always the same faceless woman, always whispering that same phrase, "You were chosen." He tried to contact Elijah, but the number had been disconnected. The emails bounced back. It was like he had never existed. Keanu flew back to New Orleans to visit the church, only to find it completely leveled, reduced to rubble like it had been abandoned for decades. Locals told him there hadn't been a church there in over 50 years. He showed them the address, the pictures, even the recording he had taken before the ritual, but nothing worked. One old man with cloudy eyes took one look at the photo and muttered something in Creole before backing away, crossing himself and warning Keanu never to return. That place, he said, was cursed long before Keanu ever set foot in it. Back in Los Angeles, the weight of it all grew heavier. Not the curse, but the responsibility. Keanu realized he wasn't just someone who had been attacked by darkness, he had been touched by it, marked, pulled into its orbit. And now, whether he liked it or not, he could feel its movements in the world. In the industry. In certain people. In the way some things just didn't feel human anymore. He started visiting spiritual healers in secret, sitting with shamans, monks, priests, even scientists who specialized in frequencies and consciousness. Each one gave him pieces of the same puzzle, that the world is layered, and some people are born with the sensitivity to walk between those layers. Most never awaken to it. But when they do, it's not a gift. It's a test. One night, while sitting in his study, Keanu opened an old notebook he had scribbled in during his darkest years. Inside were drawings he didn't remember making: circles, runes, shapes that looked like symbols but pulsed when he stared too long. And in the center of one page, the words, "She waits." He stared at that page for hours, trying to piece together the memory of writing it, but it wouldn't come. That night, he had a vision. Not a dream, he knew the difference now. He was back in the forest, back in the circle of bent trees. The woman stood there again, but this time, she had a face. And it was his. She looked at him with sorrow, not menace. And she spoke gently, almost tender, "You can either fight me, or you can understand why I chose you. But either way, you belong to both sides now." When Keanu woke up, he wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't at peace either. But he understood something profound: the black magic that had nearly destroyed him hadn't come to curse him. It came to show him what he was capable of surviving. What he was meant to carry. Not as a victim, but as a bridge. The veil between light and dark isn't as clean as people want it to be. There are people in this world, powerful people who play with energy they don't understand. Who whisper into darkness hoping to gain from it, not realizing it's always listening. He had seen it. Lived through it. And now, he carried its fingerprint on his soul. So Keanu did the only thing that made sense. He spoke out. Quietly at first. Carefully. In interviews, podcasts, conversations, never too much, just enough. He told people to stay away from things they didn't understand. To guard their spirit. To protect their peace. He warned of those who manipulate others with charm and hidden rituals, those who sell fame wrapped in shadow. Most didn't understand. Some laughed. But a few listened. And those few began to change. In the years that followed, Keanu remained a mystery to many. Still humble, still kind. But there was a depth behind his eyes now that only a few could recognize. A knowledge that came not from books or fame, but from surviving the edge of spiritual war. He never sought revenge. Never named names. That wasn't his purpose. His purpose was to walk the middle path, aware of both heaven and hell, choosing every day which side he would feed. And despite everything, the attacks, the curses, the haunting visions, he chose light. Not because it was easy, but because it was earned.